It's time.
What is up, everyone? My name is Ashura. Welcome back to the channel. If you guys can't tell, we're talking about Enel, my favorite leader. That's right, my boy. We're sticking with the full starve strat. So if you guys don't know what that is about, or maybe you're doing, you just want to see the new deck list and want to see some of the new tactics or philosophies I have for it, then stick around. We're gonna get right into it. I love this leader and deck. I've played it so much. I'm ready to talk about it. Let's go. Alright, so I'm sure as some of you smart lads and ladies have noticed, this list looks pretty similar to our EB01 full star vanilla list. The only difference is we've got some updated ratios in there, as well as 3 new cards coming out in OP07 that really make this list pop and put us over the edge when it comes to that win percentage and getting that last foot in the door for securing that win. So, let's review them. So first up, we have our boy Frankie. So he's a 4-cost, 5k, and he is a 2k counter. But that's not all, ladies and gentlemen. He's also got Trigger, where if you trigger him, he draws 1 card, and if you've got 1 or less life, then you get to play this card. So that's incredible for Enel. We like to be about 2 life or less, and so with that, that means if he is within our last life or our second to last life, we are always going to trigger him. We're going to be able to get a body on board as well as draw him. And you know what? There are certain situations where you are going to just take him to hand because he's a 2k counter. Maybe you've bricked a little bit. Maybe you need the 2k counter more. But there's going to be a lot of times where being able to get a free body as well as refill your hand with what would be the card from life is incredible. Just free body, don't lose the card. You're not discarding a card for a body. He's a great card. I mean, he's a great trigger since Beige and since You Should Disappear came out for us. So just another trigger that is going to be an auto include for us moving forward, and really makes it so that way this deck is even more deadly than it was before. Now we can replace Hiyori, which, yeah, Hiyori was cute where we could put triggers into our life, but now if Frankie, who is a 2k, is just in our life, it's a free trigger for us. There's no setup required, and yeah, we do lose some of the shenanigans where we could put You're the One Who Should Disappear at the bottom of our life, but now that we've updated ratios and we're running You're the One Who Should Disappear at 3, that appears in our life a lot more often than one would think. So moving forward, Frankie is just an amazing card to be in this deck. Alright, coming at you is number 2 of the 3 new cards in this list, and that is right, it is Egghead Luffy, or otherwise known as Rocket Luffy. So just like Frankie, this is going to raise that overall trigger percentage in your deck, and what he can do is he can KO any of your opponent's 4-cost or lower characters. So this is good against decks that flood the board, such as Red Purple Law, which is really popular right now. And so what this is going to do is that anytime they're going to attack into us, you know, we're now going to have a pretty good chance with like Onami, Luffy, to be able to actually attack them back on the crackback there, straight up on the life, and be able to start taking out their board. So he's a really good tech choice for that. Not to mention, at 5 cost with an activate main, you can drop him on board, trash him right away, and if you're at 2 or less life cards, you can pop a 4 cost or less as well as draw a card. So he is critical in that he can replace himself. And it's also an activate main, so it's not an on play where you have to do it right away. If you know your opponent can't quite remove it and it's not a removal heavy deck, well, you can play him. The next turn you can attack and then remove him. That way maybe you would clear 1 character and then you can remove him to clear another character. Not to mention, you get that card draw, be able to refill your hand. That way you're not losing your grip too much to these decks that are swarming the board, and you're not trying to, you know, go 1 for 1 with their cards. Now instead, Luffy kind of went 2 for 2 on this. So he's a really good card for decks that are going to swarm the board, and even if they don't quite swarm the board, he can be really good for taking out a blocker or 2, and he can be quite scary to your opponent. Your opponent might burn removal for him, in which case, well, now that's removal out of your opponent's hands, and that's going to make your Katakuris, Yamatos, and Aces even more safe for you. Alright, and moving on to the third and final new card in this list. It is the big, it's bad, it's Ace. Alright, so Ace is our newest boss monster. He is a 10 drop and he fills the slot in quite nicely, honestly. He's got an on play that no matter what, you can gain up to 1 life. It's not like Yamato or Katakuri where, you know, it is a situational gain life. Instead, no matter what, you'll gain life. but he does have a caveat. If you're at 2 or less life after he gains his life, then he gains rush, which is quite awesome. So if we're at 0 or 1 life, we'll get that life, and he's got rush and can straight up attack your opponent, help clear board, go for game. But he also has a nice little up to 1 clause, so he don't have to gain any life. So if you're in a situation where you're already at 2 life, but you need the rush to clear board or kill your opponent honestly outright, you don't have to gain that life and go to 3. Drop him, he'll get rush, boom, you're good. Honestly, at 2 life, you don't have to gain life, because as an Enel player, you've got 2 life, you have your Enel ability, so you've got 3, and then you've got to get hit again. So your opponent has to get 4 successful attacks in. With Enel, we should be running enough counter that within those cards and your hand, you get enough counter and filter out that you can get out of that last life attack or one of the ones before, which means your opponent now has to have 5 swings to be able to try and get lethal on you. That's absolutely bonkers. That is so good. So Ace honestly is a really nice 10 drop, even if you're not gaining life. Just having a 10k rusher where your opponent knows that the longer the game goes on, the more boss monsters you're going to see. You're going to start filling your board with those, and you're going to keep removing your opponent's board because you're going to starve them out. You're going to make sure your Yamato's online. You're going to use 10 cost Ace to rush down their attackers that are trying to attack and close game for you and kill those off. So it makes it a pretty tough struggle for your opponent, where then, you know, oh, let me play 8 cost Kit. No, I got Katakuri. So 10 cost Ace really rounds out your boss monster package to be honestly quite full, but really effective. So as I said before, guys, this is a full starve Enel list. And so what does that mean? That means we're going to be taking it nice and slow against our opponents. We're not going to be attacking them the first few turns, and instead we're going to be relying on cards like Flampe to build hand size. We're going to rely on Kidatsu to be destroying our opponent's board. We're going to rely on our tech choices like our 5 cost Sabo to help us take care of any 5 costs that are going to come up in the red-purple law matchup. We're also going to be playing Rush Enel to be dealing with our black matchups, help keep a big sticky character on board. That way we have something constantly to be able to attack and harass them with, essentially. It's also got Rush, so we're going to be able to use that to go straight into their characters that do come up rested with Rebecca. So that is one of our tech choices for black. We also have another tech choice for black with Shirahoshi. They can't remove that without giving us life, which is very problematic for Enel. So with Shirahoshi at 2 and Enel at 2, we've got some nice tech choices for the black tech matchup. Shirahoshi also could be argued that it is a late game tech choice for red purple law, where we can drop it very efficiently because it's only 2 Dawn, and yes, they can bottom deck it for free, but this means that if you suspect that they have a Gordon or Raise Max in hand and you have a boss monster on the field, then you can play this to try and distract them, essentially. Have them not reduce your boss monster to then drop it and bottom deck it, so that way you can have that blocker. And so also some other things to keep in mind, guys, when you are playing this deck is to keep in mind of rusher attacks, right? So you always want to know the deck you're playing against. So you want to know if they are playing rushers at all, and if they're not, that's honestly a really good thing for you because it makes planning out their attacks a lot easier. But what I mean by this is that, let's say you're playing against red purple law, they play Kid and Killer, right? That is a nice rusher that is going to usually be a 7k attack to you because you're always usually going to be at 2 life or less. So you got to know this, expecting that coming into the matchup. So late into the game, if you're calculating how many attacks they have and they have 2 on board plus their leader, you should automatically assume, okay, they can probably get a Kid and Killer out to make that 4 attacks. So you know that if they're going to go all out, you got to survive through 4 attacks. You can't die to that 4th attack and be surprised because it's a Kid and Killer. That's just not going to work. So you want to make sure that you know your decks. That's always going to be a great rule of thumb with any deck, especially in L, is you want to make sure that you account for those rusher attacks, especially with Enel's ability, where you don't even want to get caught in a situation where before you're able to play Katakuri, Yamato, or Ace, that you find yourself at 0 life trying to defend against multiple attacks. Because if you don't pull that blocker, or honestly multiple blockers, because Some decks like Bonnie will rest that character, or they can get through it like Red Purple Law. Well, you're kind of just SOL. So in that situation, you really want to be calculating that, okay, I'm at 2 life, I still have my leader ability, that means I can have 3 attacks. You know, I can get through 2, I'll regenerate 1. I want to try and keep that last one because I'm not at a spot where I can regenerate a life. Now, later in the game, the opposite can be true. You can try and bait them into trying to get you down to 0 life. That way they feel safe, and then maybe you drop a Yamato or you drop an Ace and you can gain that life, restart your heart a little bit, and you can get that vitality to keep going. Now you've got a big boss monster on the field. But it is very situational. You have to have a good read on your opponent and the deck. If you've seen 2 Kitten Killers already, they might not have the 3rd or 4th, but likewise, maybe you want to assume for that. You want to assume, okay, they've probably got at least 1 more. You know, it might be safe to assume they don't have the other 2, but assuming for 1 more, and you're not going to be disappointed if they have it. So, always expect the unexpected. With Enel, you're going to want to have some, you know, pre-trip planning essentially. Make sure you are planning your stuff out ahead of time. It's okay if you take an extra second on your turn, or, you know, on your opponent's attack. Hey, let me see. Okay, you got stuff out here. Okay, you got 3 attacks right now. What's the likelihood you've got a 4th and I can't live through this? Or what's the likelihood that this 4th one puts me in a really bad spot for next turn that I can't recover from? Is it better to counter out of this first one that's really easy? You know, another good trick is, okay, am I going to try and get a free cycle off of this? Because there are times where your opponent might have a weird board state that they want you to block out of the first one so they can get a bigger hit in. Well, maybe you take that first one and now they're a little weary about getting that other one in, because maybe you'll be able to counter out of it really easily, or you'll just get a free Enel ability off. Your opponent's never going to want to let you cycle your ability for free, so they're going to try and avoid that at all costs. With Enel, you can essentially act as like a mini Bonnie that saves on the dawn on your opponent's turn if you're keeping them down to 2 characters or less. So what I mean by that is, if you don't give your opponent any chance to attack into your board and only attack into your leader, then if he has 1 character and his leader, he can swing at max 1 person. Because if you're at just that 1 life, then on that second hit with no rushers, he's just going to cycle your ability. That's going to give you a free trigger. Any smart player against Enel, any seasoned person is not going to let that happen. They're not going to let you get a free trigger off, because that is just going to be free info for you. 99% of the time, it's going to be good for the Enel player. You know, you never know. They might get a body off board. They might blow up your only other character on board, in which case that's going to put you in a pretty bad spot. So, you know, as a leader where you regenerate life, we have that special ability that we're basically able to mimic Bonnie a little bit. You know, we can be a little more Dawn efficient now. We don't get that choice to tap down specifically what we want, so it gives the opponent a little more freedom, but gives us some freedom as well. Lets us be able to manipulate our opponents a little bit. I've definitely had games where I am constantly blowing up their board, so even if they're at 2 characters, for example, and I'm at 1 life, cool. I know you can only swing 2 out of 3 times because you don't have any rushers, and I know that you're going to be smarter than to swing 3 into me. So I can plan my turn out accordingly, knowing that I'm only going to have to account for 2 attacks. So little stuff like that where you can get the edge out of Enel as much as you can is going to be what wins you the game in the long term. This deck is amazing and has a lot of great cards, but you're going to want to play it as efficiently as you can and starve out your opponent, so that way they don't have cards to be able to have any lines of play. This deck thrives on starving your opponent, making sure that it has a killer grip on them, so that way you can do whatever you want. You have your lines of play and they don't have any of theirs. So something else I really like to mess with in an Enel deck is the trigger rate percentage. So in this deck, I've been able to tinker with the ratios, and I've hit a 50% trigger rate, so that way 1 and 2 life will trigger and give you something viable to use. Now, there is a little bit of planning on our parts to make this work. These are mostly defensive triggers like Beige, where they can stop an opponent from attacking, or like Onami and Luffy, where they can blow up your opponent's board. So this is pretty great, where in this kind of meta, we really are just trying to make sure our opponent's board is empty. So as such, we have to play around our own triggers, sort of. So what I mean by that is if your opponent has 2 attacks at you and you're only going to counter out of one of them, I highly suggest you take that first hit. So you take the first hit, you'll see what it is, and if it is a trigger like beige, now you can use it on your opponent's leader and get the full value out of that. Versus if you were to counter out that first one, take the second one, then that beige is going to be ineffective. You're just going to put it to your hand. Likewise, if your opponent has, maybe 3 attackers, 2 on board with their leader, then you take that first character hit, you look, and okay, it's a Luffy or an Onami, let me blow up that other character, and I've just saved myself a attack, and I've gotten rid of one of their characters. So it's like a 2-for-1 for you. So in that case, you'd be very happy to take that life. Now it's just their leader. So this is amazing. It's got a great trigger rate. I love how much triggers in this deck all the time, but again, you are going to have to plan for it a little bit. You can't just, like in past Enel deck versions, you can't just be willing to take the hit because it's going to spawn a body. Normally that's not going to happen. It can happen with Shirahoshi or Frankie in the deck, but I would say to take a hit expecting one of those triggers to happen is not a good winning strategy. You want to be taking those hits when you can, and you want to be forcing your opponent to play your way, right? You don't want to play their way. You don't want to give them any advantages. You don't want to, at the end of the game, say, man, I could have had 3 more triggers in that game, but instead they went to hand because I played it wrong and I misplayed a little bit. Or instead of countering out the first time and taking that second hit, I should have just taken the hit and I could have triggered that. We all make mistakes, but that's why I'm letting you guys know these little tips and tricks that will really push your win percentage up just a little bit more, let you be able to get those situations out of the way and be able to think about that before they come up. That way you're not going to make those mistakes when they do arise. Thank you guys for making it to the end of the video. I super appreciate it. If you guys enjoyed that, don't be afraid to like and subscribe down below. If there's any new or different content you guys would like to see, definitely let me know as well. If there's any different leaders you want me to cover, I can do that as well. And I'm going to be having a part 2 of this coming out with some gameplay. That way you guys can see the deck live and in action. I'm going to have a link for that down in the description below when that's live. So definitely look out for that. Subscribe, ring that bell. That way you guys get a notification. Peace.